Welcome to Connecting the Dots. Today, we're getting friendly about something most of us would rather avoid: conflict. I'm joined by Pinky Ghadiali, conflict resolution practitioner, coach, and someone who knows exactly how quickly miscommunication and power dynamics can derail performance. In this episode, we unpack why conflict isn't the real problem. Silence is. How power shows up in everyday team moments, and a few practical tools you can use immediately, from a 3-minute listening challenge to frameworks for handling tough conversations without drama. Let's connect the dots. Welcome to this week's episode of Connecting the Dots. I'm joined by Pinky Ghadiali, and we're going to have a friendly conversation about conflict. Welcome, Pinky. To start us off, can you connect the dots about who you are and what professional and personal experiences led you to focus on conflict and power dynamics?
Thanks for having me on, Jen. I really appreciate it. This is a great time to be talking about this as we approach the end of 2025. I've been having some interesting conversations, not only within the sports and fitness industry, but within other industries as well. I work with leaders in the healthcare, the pharmaceutical, and just started working with the fitness industry. I would say over the last couple of years, I've been more interested in this industry. And I work with leaders and people within the industry who feel like they're carrying too much on their shoulders. People that, are struggling with those difficult conversations, possibly walking on eggshells because they can't have those difficult conversations, or they're burning out because they're trying to keep the peace. And I think that is a leadership tax that every single leader is paying quietly every single day. And I think having that background that I have in healthcare and the environments that I work with and the mediation work that I've been working on, because I've just recently completed a postgraduate in conflict resolution and mediation, I've seen how quickly miscommunication and power struggles just completely derail performance. And we're all about performance, aren't we? We want a high performing team. We want that so that, leaders stay, they don't leave. But I think what I've noticed is most leaders don't lose people because of strategy. They lose people because of how they communicate or how they don't communicate in those pressure environments. So my role is really to help handle that conflict without drama or avoidance, because I know how good we are about avoiding it because we don't want to hurt other people's feelings. And then communicating that clearly when those stakes are really high. And then also turning those tense conversations into real alignment and action. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I do what I do.
As you're talking, I'm just, I go through my experiences in my mind on, conflicts that I'm currently dealing with, conflicts that I've dealt with in the past, conversations that I've had with people who are dealing with conflict. And I can't think of one person who doesn't want to avoid conflict. And actually, that's the theme. I mean, they're messy, icky conversations. In my own experience of having conflict with people, it's just like you have to walk through the mud for a long time and be messy and check your emotions and hope that you're able to articulate your point or your position in a way that somehow gets through. So it's such a charged thing. I'm actually really surprised I don't hear more about this. So how do you advise, and just kind of on a big picture, from a big picture standpoint, because I know we're going to get into the granular later. Right now you're working on helping organizations understand conflict and power And how do you help them handle it more constructively?
I think more what's interesting is what you've said there. First of all, people are in denial. I have done a lot of listening and a lot of, I would say, in my own head, market research about what this is about and what's going on. Having done the and worked with leaders around executive coaching, C suite, and looking at areas of burnout and what's going wrong, conflict seems to appear more
Hmm.
often than not. And I think what it's framed as is it's not conflict. It's more framed as I'm overwhelmed and I can't possibly have this conversation with somebody because I'm handling ego, pride, fear. There's no safe way to say what I need to say. And safety is a massive issue, right? Safety and trust. If you
Yeah.
don't trust that person that you're working with, you're not going to trust how it's going to be handled. You're not going to trust the conversation that happens off the back of it. So I think it's really about creating those safe spaces. I think it's about having those open and honest conversations, but it's also about getting comfortable about being uncomfortable about those conversations because a lot of us avoid it because we think it's easier. But actually, what the avoidance does is that it turns it into passive aggressive, then becomes awkward, difficult. It becomes defensive. So we've all seen it, right? So you get these defensive emails or passive aggressive emails. No one can actually look you in the eye and have a conversation with you because you've already gone past the point of speaking to that person. You can't talk to them. And I think the fear is if I speak up now, I'm going to be labelled as difficult or trying to cause trouble. I've often heard these kind of words, and I don't want to upset the other person, right? Because they might cry or whatever. And how do I deal with that?
So I mean, we can make this really big and really deep, but I think having conversations where you have contrasting opinions or differing positions, like that's just not a life skill that most of us grow up with. And I wonder really curiously, like maybe we'll get some comments in the podcast from people who have expertise in this area. But I think it starts at home, and you model what you see at home, and then at some point home is that reference point that you take into the workplace. Because when you talk about safety and trust, like these emotional foundations are what you learn at home. So if you don't have these skills in you deeply, then how can you apply them effectively within an organization? So it's and I guess that this is a wonderful podcast for people to listen going into the holiday season, where they may be around those foundational relationships that started it all. But actually, that was something that I thought about as we were preparing for this podcast. I've worked in many large enterprise size organizations over 25 years, and early on in my journey, I was working for a Canadian company called Good Life Fitness, and they gave their managers training on crucial conversations and crucial confrontation. And it was a very, very useful training as a manager, but that is the only time in my entire career that I have had any mention of conflict resolution training. So, what should conflict training look like in organizations today if we're going to use the magic should?
I think so. I think there needs to be some core skills involved, right? There needs to be something where we look at some steps. So I've created a conflict blueprint, by the way. So if anybody wants that, please get in touch. I think one of the things that really stands out for me is that first of all, you know where to go if something like this does happen. Like, what is your process? What are your policies within the organization that allow you to know what to do? So something happens, for example, there is a power imbalance, right? Power is everywhere in a gym. I'm just going to use this as an example because I know that, there's lots of fitness operators out there that are probably listening to this right now. There's general managers, that's one kind of power, but then also you've got trainers. They've also got a power as well because they're filling up the classes. They're actually bringing in money. Then you've got, receptionists as well that have power because they know every single member by their name. So I think there's different types of power. It shapes everything. It shapes how we interact. It shapes on how we feel about certain things. So I think that these conversations are all dependent on which level you're at. But I also feel like every single level needs training in this space. Because as you say, having a 1 hour workshop on this is not going to work. There needs to be processes, there needs to be policies, there needs to be something where, if you look at, say, a gym operator, for instance, and you look at the power level, most people feel more comfortable to speak to a general manager than they do trusting someone in head office, right? Somebody they've never met before. So general managers are the people with the boots on the ground. They're the ones that need to have this training. They're the ones that are actually the ones that not only are in contact with head office, they're also speaking to members. So I think that's really important for them to have that training, but also leaders need to have this training. I think it's desperate. I really do. Any leader, regardless of what level they're at, asking who has the influence here. Get the job title. Who has the influence here? And how do you involve them early rather than fighting later? Because literally what we're not doing is we're not addressing that elephant in the room. And the avoidance is, it's disempowering. Avoidance might look really calm on the surface, but actually underneath it's a mess because you haven't addressed issues that are probably long-standing and causing conflict.
I mean, it's as you're talking about the power dynamics and the receptionist at the gym. So for example, if the receptionist at the gym let people in that shouldn't have been let in, and then got some sort of a warning or accountability from the general manager, but didn't feel safe enough to explain the thoughts behind why those people were allowed in. Like maybe there was a legitimate reason, maybe there wasn't, but if there was no patience or safety, I'm just going to repeat, like if I don't feel safe enough to explain my position, you're not going to understand the origins of my actions. And if you do, then we resolve it and hopefully we can build on it for the next time. But if we don't, I'm going to shut down, and either I'm gonna do it again from a retribution standpoint. Like there's this, I'm sure there's a whole matrix on the different things that I could do depending on my personality or cultural issues. But it's like I could quietly attack you, or I could quietly quit, and then both of those things ends up in a lose position for the organization because you've impacted the culture, you've impacted the service, and you've impacted the retention, probably on the staff, but also likely on the members as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you've mentioned there is really vital because what you'll get off the back of that, if you've got a receptionist that doesn't trust a manager, what they will do is they'll disengage. They will not show up and, like you said, quietly quit. But worst case scenario, they'll just leave.
Yeah.
So this is where that high churn comes up. But also, if you've got somebody in the gym or leisure setting that is an instructor, they're just going through the motions, and the reception staff are being less warm, or the managers are hiding in an office, conflict isn't the problem in your team, silence is.
Yeah.
And when people stop speaking up, they don't stop feeling frustrated. It's still there. They
Yeah.
just take it underground. It's just covert. And that's even worse, because that's when you get the passive aggressive emails. That's where you get the disengagement, the quiet quitting. You know, healthy teams have those disagreements. And I've seen it happen. They have them out loud, and that's okay. And they have them early, and they have some structure with that. So I think when you're in your next team meeting, I think one of the things that you need to ask yourselves is, what are we not saying that we need to say to move forward? Then actually listen, because listening is one of those skills that you need to learn to be in an environment where you are being heard. And that's how you build that trust. That's how you build that safe environment. Because if you're not listening and the other person doesn't feel heard, then you're going to get into conflict, because you're perpetuating that cycle.
I mean, look, I'm gonna go back to listening, because I feel like that's one of the hardest things to do. It's one of the things that it's a practice that is a practice for me, because especially when situations are emotionally charged, and I'll think about, like, what's most recent on my mind is, like, I have a 19-year-old daughter. So teenage daughters and their mothers are notorious for being each other's tripwire or something. But you know, we do really practice. We let ourselves be messy, and it's not always perfect, but we do always come back to the table. And what I notice is that the higher our frustration gets, the less effective we are. So if we're both about to spill over in our frustration slash resentment continuum with each other, we're not listening, and we can't create that space to start having productive conversations. So I can also see this in other relationships. This is just like more recent for me, so I can articulate it a little bit better. But it's not unlike professional situations. Like, if frustration is there because silence has been there, and it's been there for too long. There's too many things that you have not said. Talk to me about listening, because I think listening is something all of us can get better at. What are some things that we can do to just raise our awareness about listening skills and apply that, immediately today?
Today, I think listening is vital for any situation. So I smiled when you said 19-year-old. So I've got a recently turned 18-year-old son. Listening skills need to be worked on, I think, from both of our sides. It's like there are core skills that we need to be human, and I think empathy is one of them. Listening and empathy come together, and body language. When you listen to somebody and you're not looking at them, you're looking at your phone, you're not really paying attention. I'm not just talking about at home, I'm talking about when you're in the office. I've seen leaders do this. They're completely disengaged. They're looking at the phone. They're actually doing something else. And how unlikely you are to feel listened to if they're doing that, because they're not focusing on you. They're not even bothered. They're not interested. So that's the first thing. Actually give them some time, look at them in their eyes, give them some eye contact, actually sit down and say, you know, how can, like, tell me what happened from your perspective, what's going on. And the other thing is, be curious. What am I missing is what you need to be asking yourself, not how am I going to win this. That's not the whole purpose of this. This is about how can I listen to understand without reacting, without being, overly trying to think of a solution. You're not here to fix the problem. Just listen and actually think about from their perspective. Think about from their point of view, their shoes. This is the empathy side. So if you think about from their point of view and their shoes, you're immediately taking out from yourself that reactive state. So you're already thinking, okay, so if I was them, this is how I would feel as well. So yeah, I get it. And part of this is being able to understand them without putting any of your judgment on there, right? Listening without judgment, that's hard because you've got that narrative in your head that's saying something. When somebody's talking, you'll notice that, oh, so that's what they mean by that. Oh, right, that's what they're talking about. No, stop that. Just listen. And not, there's another thing with this. When you're actually listening to that person, you often feel like this might be an assassination or a character attacking another character. Mm-hmm. So you need to think about when this happens, what is the impact on me or what is the impact on the team, rather than you always, or it's you or your fault. So that's the other thing. And then the tolerating this discomfort, right? So staying in the conversation. Now, this is what a lot of leaders don't do. They don't like getting uncomfortable. I've already said that. So
yeah,
one thing about getting over that, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, is that trying to stay in that conversation long enough to reach some kind of resolution, some kind of clarity there, some nugget where you can come out of it and go, actually, yeah, that's helped and that's really resolved something here. Not just a relief, just that little bit of clarity. And those skills live within a good operating team, a healthy culture, a healthy leadership team. But the thing is with this is that unhealthy culture, you're never going to get this kind of time, this kind of airtime. You will not get it because it's toxic and it becomes it's just an excuse, isn't it? It's a frustration dump. And that means that you're not going to get the results that you need when it comes to conflict.
The other thing that I'm thinking as I hear you talking about listening and going into these conversations is also, this is my own experience as well. Like, you read your fourth Brene Brown book and you're ready to go in and fix the world, guns a-blazing. And you realize it's going to take more than one conversation. Yeah. So it's like, when you start having these conversations, there's also an element, I think for me anyway, this has been my learning of managing my own expectation and not assigning like I'm expecting this at the end of the conversation. The conversation will end up where it ends up rather than me having any sort of kind of outcome associated with it. And then the other thing in my own process is knowing when to take a break, because sometimes they're very heavy and they're really charged, and at some point, it's not constructive anymore, and having that opportunity to take a break and start again is really important. So let's go into power, because like you can't extract power from conflict, especially in an organization where people are working. Like, how does power shape the way that conflict or communication? I think broadly, how does power shape the way that communication, which could be productive or could end in conflict, unfold in teams?
I think there's different types of power dynamics within any team. So, you've got the formal titles, the reporting lines, etc. And I think if leaders start acting defensively, um, I think formal power will completely shut conversation down. And how I've seen it play out before is that if you've got informal power, so for instance, you've got, you know, popularity, for instance, or expertise, that shapes people by the fact that people are going to follow them. They're influencers, right? So if you've got an influencer in the team, and they are cynical and they are a bit moody, that kind of dynamic will then spread. It spreads a lot faster. So when we talk about this all comes from the top, this is what we're talking about. So for instance, the real power sits with the leadership team, right? But then you've got, say, for instance, a club manager who everyone loves, admires, trusts more than somebody up in the leadership team. Then you are more likely to have initiatives, things that happen that are listened to more by that general manager than they are by the leadership team.
Or get more information because of the safety and the relationship, right? So that kind of it demonstrates your point about having enough safety and enough rapport to create the environment for those conversations. So conversations are happening, but they're happening in the wrong place in this case.
Yeah, exactly. And I think once you start involving this influencer in your conversations in leadership teams, then that's when you start getting adoption and improvement in communication. Everything improves once you start doing that. And then you've got to ask yourself, like, who is that person of influence here in the team or on the ground, regardless of the job title? And you've got to involve them. You've got to involve them in processes rather than having to fight them later on.
I mean, it's a great example of leverage, because there are those people who just have more social currency than they do in org chart decision making, but they're hubs of information, and they're also, if engaged properly, they could be great leverage for changing culture quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it happen before, and it's a really interesting way very quickly to get what you're aiming to do, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to talk about informal power just a little bit more, because I've seen a lot of informal power that's kind of unnamed, and still exists in organizations, and that's when you have the children of the owners that work within an organization, or the people that they're dating working within an organization. Like, that's, we don't talk about it, and it's always like, oh, it shouldn't be a big deal, they shouldn't be treated any differently. Can you talk a little bit about, you're nodding, so I'm guessing you've seen that too. It's like, how is that really perceived, and what's the best way to navigate that kind of informal power?
You see that in family businesses, and you see that
Yeah.
in businesses that are, those dynamics where, it's a family, inverted commas.
Mm-hmm.
Dangerous, I think is the word. I think I think people that are involved that aren't even part of the team, it's a really difficult dynamic. But I think it's creating those boundaries and actually saying, okay, this is where we sit, and those conversations, although they happen, they're not
Hmm.
part of the team. But those influences, they can't be helped. You can only control what you can control. The
Right.
people that are not in the room, that aren't making the decisions, they can only be there as an influence, but they can't be making those decisions for you. So I think that's an interesting dynamic. That is definitely a power dynamic as well, because you've obviously got leaders who have got their children coming in to run the business as well. I think formal training is really important. What you touched on earlier about nobody's ever had conflict training before, ever.
As we were talking about all of these different scenarios, you see how complex and nuanced the subject of conflict actually is, and how important it is to be able to address. Otherwise, you're dismantling a very, very tricky bomb, I think. What factors might complicate communication or conflict management that leaders need to take into consideration? So I'm just going to tell you the things that I was thinking, and then let you go with it. But, there's obviously different kinds of communication depending on where you're from, how old you are, your gender, your ethnicity. Like, all of those different lenses affect how you communicate, how you deal with power, and how you may or may not work with conflict. What do leaders need to do to have a effective toolkit?
I think there are some skills that are needed. I think there's definitely, after a tough conversation,
Hmm.
I think one thing that people need to be asking themselves is, do people that are around me feel smaller or stronger? If they feel smaller, something in the culture is off. And if they feel stronger, you are going in the right direction. And I think a simple rule is, we talk to people, not about people. And I
Hmm.
think if we set boundaries, if we set rules, if we set policies, we set the way that we talk to people, and we become curious and we start asking questions, then that's when cultures start coming together, because you actually, different backgrounds, different people coming together, you've got this diverse mix, this a beautiful melting pot of people that you could really make some good use out of, because everybody has different perspectives, and that's what's the importance of diversity within teams. And it's getting more and more so now, because it is so vital and so necessary, and also impacts your performance, improves it, and improves the return on investment by over 40% when we look at McKinsey reports, etc.
Hmm.
We have to look at, how can we open this culture? How can we make it healthy? How can we use our skills as a human, and how can we be human about it, right? Like, I always say this when I drop back into chat about culture, I talk about when you were a child and you were playing on the playground and you had friends and you didn't know who they were and you wanted to know more about them. What did you do? You go up to them and you go and ask them. You go,
Right.
you know, Christmas is coming up. What are you doing? How do you celebrate? You know,
Yeah.
those kind of conversations. Same thing applies in the workplace. There is nothing different about it. If you go up to somebody and you say, hey, I know, like, you celebrate different things. Are you celebrating Christmas this year? What are you doing? And what do you eat? How does your family get together? Not only are you bridging the gap, the cultural gap, but you're also building a relationship with that person, right? You're finding out more about them. You're like, oh, right, so your son's called Jack and he's 18. Oh, great, my son's also 18. And, and then you know the person, you know them. You're building trust. This goes back to my point about if you don't trust someone, you are not going to open up to them. But if you start asking them healthy questions and you start asking them curious questions about who they are, what their background is, be human, actually be human. Imagine you are having a drink, a coffee with them,
Yeah.
and you're finding out about that person. Find out about them. And then they will actually start realizing that you're interested in them. And I think this is really important for leaders. Just walking past somebody going, oh, hey, how are you? And just walking straight past them and not even wanting to know how they are. What is the point of that?
Okay, so I have to take notes when I'm listening, and because it helps me make connections. But as I hear you, I hear these themes coming back. Of course, curiosity. So this set of skills, or yeah, checklist for leaders almost. I'm hearing curiosity. I'm hearing listening skills. I'm hearing empathy. And then there's two other dots that I connect there. In order to be able to do those things, like to sit down and listen, there's this there needs to be an intention to have time to do it, because I feel like our society has just gotten overrun by hustle culture, where it's constantly okay to be juggling like way too many things, so that you don't have time or emotional energy to be present when you're actually talking to people, and then that is more detrimental than it is constructive. And then the other question I had for you on that list, if I'm giving you back what you're saying to me so far, is like, what about emotional regulation? Because in tough conversations, you're basically tiptoeing across a landmine of emotions. And when those emotions are strong and you're not used to dealing with them, sometimes we're not showing up as our best self.
Yeah.
So what about emotional regulation?
Emotional regulation is one of the things, another core skill that you need to know about. It's a bit like, so for me, it's about not responding in a way that's going to be reactive. So often, I think one of the things about this is when leaders shut down and they don't realize it. So we we can rush to a solution straight away before even listening, and that's what happens often. And it comes across as, right, here's what we'll do, like straight away. Yeah, okay, but you haven't actually listened because you haven't heard what the issue is. You haven't listened to the person. You haven't fully got that time where you've actually processed it. And I think it is a lot about processing and reflecting on what people are saying. And I know that people are busy. I know that things can get quite hectic. But I think it's important to not minimize things. So it's like you can't just sit there and go, oh, it's not that bad. Let's stay positive. And I think I've heard that a few times in situations, and I just think, no, let's stop. We need to completely rewind on what you've just said there. Because that is, so minimizing situations like that then just creates this massive, it just spirals out of control and it becomes bigger than what the problem was in the first place. So those minimizing concerns is a bad thing. But then when the other thing is asking for honesty.
Yeah.
So they get the honesty and then they get defensive when they hear it. And so this is this is one of the things that I've worked with before when, managers have said, "Oh, my door's always open." And then you ask employees and they go, "Yeah, but we'd never walk through it."
But yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. And basically because I was talking about this earlier, body language. He's always on his phone. Body language in a meeting, sighing, eye rolling, arguing every point. You know, it it's just that whole thing about listening before responding. Maybe count to 10 before you respond to anything, you know.
Well, it's those timeouts as well, right? Like that, and you need to have safety in order to do it. But I think, behind every frustration is an opportunity to actually improve things if you can flip it, right? Like, so that's one point. But the other thing that I'm really curious about is like emotional regulation. This is not something that we learn as a life skill. Most people I know that haven't done any work with coaches or therapists are not emotionally regulated. What would you say to a senior leader who has never done any coaching or therapy work on their likelihood to be emotionally regulated? Just, maybe it's confronting, but it is a check-in when you're leading people. You're there in service to them.
Yeah, you are. As a leader, you're there
Yeah.
to serve. And I think that service attitude is not there for many leaders. If you are not serving, you're managing. And that's not what you're there to do. You're not there to manage. You're there to lead people. So going back to your question, I think one of the things that when I've worked with managers before, I've asked them to actually put a timer on and listen for 3 minutes before responding.
Okay,
Three
that's very
minutes,
practical. Hmm.
3 minutes is a long time for
Okay.
someone that just wants to bite back and shout and just go, "Here's what we're going to do," and get defensive. So that's one thing, and that's actually difficult, very difficult. And then, secondly, thank people for bringing a difficult conversation to the table.
Hmm.
That's another thing. And then, by doing that, just by doing those two things, the number of people that came to see him and talked about issues increased, and the quality of information he was getting got much better. And that meant less people were struggling. There were less people having issues because they're able to talk about it. Half of the issue here is that people aren't able to air their problems. They're not given airtime. So if you're giving people airtime, you're actually listening to them. People feel heard. That's how humans work. If you're sitting there having a coffee with someone, you're listening to them. You're actually in that conversation with them. You're actually having, it's almost like you're having that time with that person and you're feeling heard, you're feeling seen, and you're feeling listened to. And they're super important things for somebody. And so, one question that you can ask yourself is, what signals do I give off when I'm under pressure? Because you can't actually change anything in what you're seeing. You can't change that. But what you can do is what you're doing. And that's
Hmm.
part of the emotional regulation is, what signals do I give off? And you
Yeah.
have to work on yourself. And those people that haven't worked with therapists or coaches do not know how to do that. So I
I
think
mean,
these are simple things.
but this is one of those things that you're giving them tools right now. So I really love the 3-minute listening challenge, and I also like that reflective prompt which is like, what is in my circle of influence? I am in my circle of influence, but what else in this situation is? And that's actually the power that everybody has in the conversation, is the things that they can control, right? Like that's your power in any situation. I yeah, I'm scrolling through our questions, and we've actually hit most of them. And I want to actually give a scenario that I know that I've heard multiple times. And I'd like your perspective on what the leader could do and what the person in the scenario can do to navigate a conflict that is unfortunately, I think, more common than we want it to be. So many times, and I've heard this many times over the course of my career, someone will take a job or an extra responsibility in their role, and they will be promised either compensation or promotion within a certain amount of time. And this is sometimes promised by someone who doesn't actually have the ability to make it happen on the timeline that is promised. So then you get people who are often, coming up to their annual review, which often happens around this time of the year, where they feel like they have been promised something that they have delivered on their side, but for whatever reason, whether it's in or out of the leader's control, they can't follow through with what they committed to people. This is clearly a friction point. So if you take both roles, and we're doing this blue sky, so best case scenario, what does good look like in both of those stakeholders?
I think from my point of view, this is about negotiation.
Okay.
This is about you're asking for something. This hasn't happened. Now you have to revisit it. And I think it's about there has to be an element of assertiveness and self-expression, but at the same time, it has to be backed by data. It has to be backed by something.
Okay. So that's tip number one. Make sure that you have the clear agreement and anything that you need to present your case.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, you need to have made a list or notes, or I mentor a lot of people, and currently I'm mentoring people that are in the outdoor industry.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that I always say to my mentees is, have you made a list of all the things that you've achieved this year? What have you done that is outside of your work remit and within your work remit, your job role, your criteria, what you're supposed to be doing? And have you presented that with actual returns? What are the outcomes? What are the goals that you've hit? What have you done that has improved the bottom line, improved company culture, improved the data? And then go and present that, and do it in the way that you are respecting the individual, but you are also being assertive, and use I feel statements. Use statements that you're saying, so yourself before the person. So offering the fact that you've done certain things and how you should be compensated for that. And I think there are many people out there, and I've seen it with mentees as well, who are scared of actually going over that hurdle by asking for what they want. And this is
what has been agreed.
Or what has been agreed, exactly. So I think there is an element of the communication side, but it's also about how you frame it and how you come. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think just to paraphrase what I hear you saying is like go in with your business case, with your business contribution, and if your company is clear enough to have like operational key results that are published for the year, tie them back to those things so that you can show how you're directly contributing to the overall priorities as well. Like be specific.
Yes.
And I mean, we're presenting it as a very linear thing. It's like I had a job at the beginning of the year, I was made a promise at the beginning of the year, and we're now at the end of the year and nothing changed. But that's the other thing that's inevitable, is that many things could have changed from point A to point B, which could have changed the outcome. It could have changed the promise. So go to the leader. Like what are you expecting kind of foundationally from the leader in this conversation?
I think from any conversation like this, the leader has to do something. This is, part of your contract. It's something that needs to be done. I think leaders need to also understand they don't always handle things very well, and they have to say it. I
Hmm.
didn't handle that very well.
Yeah.
Can we reset? Or, from experience, what I have seen happen many a time is that you can go in and be very open about certain things and create that level of safety and honesty and trust. And
Hmm.
you can also say, we've hit tension here. Let's slow down and name it. You
Right.
know, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's normal to disagree without it becoming personal. We don't have to become personal about disagreements at all. Healthy cultures allow disagreements to happen.
Yeah.
But this certain situation that you're naming and you're talking about, I think it's important that leaders understand that you're not always right, and there are ways to deal with these kind of things as well that may not be your way. So there could be some lessons for you to learn here in that space. There could be that, in the future we will tackle this earlier on and not till it gets too late and explosive. But yeah, I think it's manageable.
I think that's really important. What you're saying is like, if your follow up conversation with a team member about kind of their development, their performance is not happening frequently enough, and it gets to the end of the year, you can bet that they remember what they've promised, but you might not. Especially if it boils down to compensation or next steps like career path. So I feel like there has to be some just kind of a reflective process, because now we're at the beginning of the end of the year and going into the beginning of the next year. It's like to do things better. Is there a clear goal setting process that you actually go through with your team members? Is it iterative so it can change through the course of the year? Does your team member know where they stand right now before the annual review? Because I think if there's any question marks, then that should all be, that's a mirror that the leader needs to hold up. Yeah, and all of those things would prevent a conversation that might err to the side of conflict.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we want.
Absolutely. So let's bridge to like talk a little bit more about your conflict blueprint. Tell me more about the services and how you work with organizations and how they can get in touch with you if they are recognizing some of the things that we've talked about.
Yeah, sure. So I have a couple of tools that you can use that you can reach out to me for. So I've got the conflict blueprint, which is a 5-step process which you can implement quite quickly. And then I also have a conflict impact scorecard. Try and say that when you're drunk. It's It's a 2 minute toolkit and it's simple. It just gives you a quick audit of your organization, of where you're at, what it's
Great.
costing you, lost time, lost people, lost opportunity, where that sits, and then you can book a call with me, which is like a free 30-minute. We'll have a chat and see how I can help you. If I can help you, I will tell you. If I can't, I'll pass you on to someone that can. And I offer tailored approaches, so coaching and facilitation, mediation, any of these focus sessions as well. So yeah, just you can find me on LinkedIn. By Pinky G is my tag. You can also reach out to me via email, admin@bypinky.com. You can check out my website, bypinky.com. And yeah, we can chat and see if I can help and see if these disagreements can be turned into something more productive.
They definitely can. I think under every disagreement is an opportunity, and you showed that repeatedly. We were chatting before we hit record, and we thought it was a really great time. And instead of shout outs, to do some book recommendations. You said you had a few.
I've
So
got a
we
couple of really good books, and
okay.
I thought this would be really useful for you since we're going into the holiday period. And you might have a little bit of time, or you might just want to escape from those scary relatives that have dropped into
They're
your.
not scary anymore. You're now ready to rock.
That's it. You're ready to rock, handle any conflict that happens in the house. You've got the toolkit. One of the books that I read during my postgraduate, and it's not a heavy book, but it is actually really interesting. It's called Difficult Conversations, and it's by Douglas Stone, Patton, and Heen. So they're the three authors of that book. And there's another one that comes to mind, which is, and it will come to me in just a second. Give me a minute. Brain fog.
It's like the immediate demand. I'll come up with one while you're thinking of it.
Oh yes, I remember. I
You got it.
remember it now.
Okay.
So it's called Getting to Yes, and it's a
Okay.
negotiation agreement strategy book. And this was part of my postgraduate reading material, and it's by Fisher and Yuri. And it's basically one of the questions that you asked towards the end there, Jen, about negotiation. It's really useful for that, getting to the yes.
I mean, and I think that's also really interesting how adjacent negotiation is to conflict. Because when I was thinking about it, the conversations that I've had with my network that are struggling with it, they're seeing it as conflict. But you're saying it's negotiation, and then that's right next door, but another skill to work on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation for me because so much has come up, and I'm sure that's going to be the same for people who listen to the podcast. But thank you so much for your wisdom, and we'll include all of your links, including the book, in the show notes. And until the next time, thanks so much, Pinky.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Connecting the Dots. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, share it with someone who'd enjoy it too. You can find all of our episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you follow the show, leave a rating. It helps more people discover our work. Until next time, keep connecting the dots and keep building the future you want to see.